Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Graham. I'm the Executive Director of the Manitoba League for Persons with Disabilities. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. I'll be your facilitator for this meeting. With me today is my colleague, Ella. She will be handling questions from the chat and technical things. Hopefully you can see there's also an ASL interpreter on the screen as well as captioning. Um, Before we get started, I would like to open up today's session with a land acknowledgement. We at the Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities acknowledge the work we do to support people with disabilities and Indigenous people with gifts. This work takes place on the traditional lands and waterways of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation. Our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, and our hydro comes from Pasqueque Cree Nation. Sorry for mispronouncing that. We respect the treaties made here and all locations we are participating from, and we are grateful to work, live, and interact on this land. As this webinar is being shown across Turtle Island, we would encourage all participants and viewers to take the time to consider the land and waters they live on and the people that these lands and waters belong to. In the context of today's conversation, I think it's important to point out that Inuit people in Canada were not granted the right to vote until 1950, and until 1960, First Nations people could not vote without giving up their status. Thank you all for joining us for today's session on voting issues for the 2025 federal elections. With us today are 5 distinguished panelists. We have Rabia who's the National Director of Display Without Poverty. We have David Crone, who's a member of Barrier Free Manitoba. We have Kristen Burness. Sorry, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your last name. She's the chair of the Right to Housing Coalition. We have Cynthia Henley, who's a senior outreach officer for Elections Canada, and we have Tag Omir, who's the outreach officer for Elections Canada. If I've mispronounced any names, please correct me because I've only been reading them in text form. Haven't had too many chances to say last names particularly out loud. So each of these presenters are going to speak for 10 minutes, and then we're going to follow that by 20 minutes for questions. So I'll let Rabia get started if she's ready.
Oh, wow. Okay. Awesome. And I'm actually going to attempt to time myself. So give me a 1-minute warning if you can. And if you hear me pick up my phone, it's only to try to listen to the time. So bear with me. You're probably reading my hearing my screen reader as people are popping in and out of the chat, or in and out of anything to do with this machine. So I'm going to have to plug in an earphone so my screen reader isn't heard by everyone under the sun. And boy, I have a few earphones, so bear with me while I figure that out. Some upgrades have been done to technology which are posing new barriers, dare I say. So apologies for the little disruption here of plugging in the headset, so you're not hearing a funky little voice overriding everything else that you're trying to tune into. So my name is Rabia Khidr. I am situated in the traditional territories, most recently of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, i.e. Mississauga, Ontario, on Turtle Island. Glad to have the opportunity to speak to you. I am the National Director of Disability Without Poverty. I'm also one of the founders and CEO of Dean Support Services and the Race and Disability Canada Project. So I live, eat, and breathe disability rights. I identify myself as a hyphen with many hijabs. I think I'm wearing some sort of purple head covering today. I identify myself as a Muslim, Punjabi, Pakistani, Canadian woman, wife, mother, daughter of aging parents, sibling of individuals with disabilities, systems disruptor, social entrepreneur, yada, yada, yada. And I happen to have a disability. I'm blind. And, you know, that means that I spend a lot of time listening. So talking to a silent audience is very tricky space for me. But I will do the best I can. And as a systems disruptor, some of the views and opinions that I express are mine and mine alone, and do not represent the views and opinions of the hosts, the organizers, the funders, the supporters, the attendees, affiliates, etc., etc., etc. And regardless of my systems disrupting nature, I will attempt to commit to not saying anything that needs to be edited. Okay, so I promise to commit to that. So Disability Without Poverty is a grassroots movement, nonpartisan, non-government funded in that regard. Like, we don't take funding from government. We're funded by philanthropy, who have believed in us and have believed in the issue of disability poverty. Poverty is huge in this country. Every political party, every politician is faced with questions around affordability, cost of housing, cost of food, cost of transportation, cost of healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for people with disabilities, it's the added cost of disability. Now, we came to being because philanthropists in this country, foundations, funders, believed that there needed to be some work done to mobilize people, to educate people, to inform people, and get people involved in educating people in positions of power. And therefore, so that people can make informed decisions when it comes to elections, whether to vote or not to vote, and who to vote for. What we try to do is to make sure that people know what the policies are, what the platform or positions are of political hopefuls, so that they can make choices that are well informed, so that they can ask questions and they can participate. And the way we do our educating is through publishing opinion editorials or op-eds in newspapers, by putting out press releases, by talking to the media, by voicing the issues that we're hearing from disabled people in different formats, whether through email, through interviews, through community consultations or town halls. However people are choosing to share their lived experience with us, we are taking that and amplifying that learning to make sure that people who form policy are able to form that policy knowing fair well what the realities are of their constituents. Now, our goal is to help people realize their power. Whether able-bodied or disabled, we have power in a democracy. And that power rests around our choice to participate in our democracy as voters. These are our citizenship rights. And in that, we vote based on maybe the candidate. We like the candidate. We like the party leader. Maybe we feel that they're really bang on a political issue that matters to us. So for disabled people, poverty is huge in this country. 27% of us live with a disability in this country. And of course, if 27% of us live with a disability, there are many, many, many people who care about us, who love us, who are our family members and supporters. So that's a huge voter base that should not be ignored, regardless of their participation. And many a times we are seen as people who are hard to reach, people who just don't get involved in our democracy, who may not vote, and therefore our issues don't matter. Whether we vote or not, we need to make sure that our issues matter. And the way we do that is by educating and informing, by mixing and mingling with anybody and everybody that's putting their name on a local ballot at any level of our system, whether it's at the municipal level, provincial level, federal level, regional level. Sometimes we may have two municipal layers of governance. So, there are decisions made at the city level, there are decisions made at the regional level, there are decisions made at the provincial level and the federal level. One of the things I learned is that when it comes to disability poverty and various issues, the federal government has the money, the provinces have the responsibility, and municipalities face all the problems. They see the reality of people, including people with disabilities. Over 50% of food bank users are disabled people today. Over 4 in 10 people living in poverty are disabled, and probably a lot more. These are huge numbers, my friends. From province to province to province, the disability rate varies. For example, in Nova Scotia, I think there's about 37 or 39% of the population is disabled. So really, we need to realize our power. We need to get informed. We need to ask questions. We need to do a lot of reading and understanding of where party positions are on the issues that matter to us. So there's something called, a party platform. And there are politicians within the party and staff that are there to craft that platform. And that's how they build their whole strategy on. And then they go around trying to promote that strategy through sound bites in the media, through attack campaigns, through events and activities on the ground, through door knocking, through little info pamphlets that you might get at your door.
Robbie, I'm just nudging you. You're at 10 minutes. But did anything final?
Sorry. So these are the types of things that we have to be mindful of. We have to be mindful of the issues that matter to us. And given the issues that matter to us, we have to question people that come looking for our vote. Whether we give our vote to them or not, whether we go out and vote or not, it is really, really important that we ask questions. We get informed, we get involved, we learn, and we advocate for ourselves, and we rally people around us to advocate for us. Write your story, write a letter, write an op-ed, do social media posts, do whatever you got to do to get the issues that matter to you out there so that they capture the attention of candidates and incumbents in the federal election when it comes to ending disability poverty and at the provincial level, because it really takes everybody to change the system, and every one of us has to do our part with and without lived experience. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Robbie. David, if I can move on to you.
Sure. So thank you for inviting me. My name is David Crone. My day job is I'm the executive director of the Cerebral Palsy Association. One of the committees I'm on is Barrier Free Manitoba. And just to give you a bit of a history, Barrier Free Manitoba was established in 2008. And the goal of Barrier Free was to get accessibility legislation passed in Manitoba. We kind of took it from the Ontario Accessibility Act. So in December of 2013, the Manitoba Accessibility Bill was passed. And there's 5 different standards from customer service, employment, websites and information systems, transportation, built environment. And really what Barrier Free now is out there doing is trying to get the bill fully implemented and make it so that the AMA is more than just a press release every December the 3rd. But on a national scale, what I wanted to talk about is just some of the things that we can all do to get accessibility legislation passed in every province. And the Canadian Accessibility Act is a start. And it's one of the bills that was actually passed with some resources to it. And I think what we really need to do is get to a critical mass so that we can change the way we do business. We can change kind of how, when I was a kid, everybody smoked. And now it's, being a generation later, less and less people are smoking. We need to change the attitudes. We need to make sure that accessibility, eliminating those barriers before they're put up. And how do you deal with a barrier when a company or an organization is approached with it? How do you deal with that? And I'm taking the long view here. I'm taking the next generation. How do we go and change how we do business? How do we make it so that businesses, organizations, governments, from the little association like mine to the larger organizations, make sure that what we offer in the community, make sure that there's low barriers or no barriers out there. And we want to get away from a complaints-based system so that when I go to a place of business and I find a complaint, I identify it, and hopefully it's resolved, relatively easily. So the Accessibility for Canadians Act is a federal legislation. The Canadian or the Manitoba legislation is Manitoba only. But what we really want to do is get to that critical mass. We want to be proactive in limiting the barriers that we all deal with. Just like was said, 27% of Canadians have identified a disability. It's also important that we all work together to identify and eliminate those barriers. More and more provinces are coming up with their own legislation to eliminate barriers. We also want to have it based on human rights. We're not looking for a charity here. We're looking for the point where it's the law. We need to change how we do business. So, and accessibility is more than just a ramp into a building or a power door opener. The built environment is important, but it's also all the different things for accessibility. All those standards are out there. And if we don't know it, we have to work with people with lived experience to identify those barriers and overcome them over time. And like I said, let's take the long view on this so that we change the way we do business. So it's easier for us to it's not even an issue in another generation. People just think, oh, I shouldn't have to phone and ask to find out if this space is accessible or whether this program is accessible. And so that just in the community, it is accessible. So how do we do that? What are the simple ways that we can do this? Well, one of the power of purchasing is really the way I think it's going to work with. So the purchasing power of the government of Canada is vast and huge. So if the government of Canada put in every business and every organization that wants to do business with them, what is your accessibility plan? How do you deal with the complaint? How do you overcome those barriers that you live with? That will really help change the attitudes and come to that critical mass. And it's not just the government of Canada, it's all the federal agencies that they regulate, all the crown corporations that they regulate, all the different things that they need to do. One of the things that I know is the government of Canada gives out a lot of grants to different organizations on a vast variety of different supports in the community. Well, how do you communicate with people? How do you deal with complaints? How do you deal with starting a new program And how do you make it truly a universal design as opposed to having all these barriers built in, those unintended consequences that you might have. So that's really the easiest thing to do. It doesn't cost the government money up front. It just makes sure that they have to change how they do business, how they procure. They can also work with different provinces and territories on trying to harmonize what those standards are. So a company can go across Canada and really, have one solution. And I think if we do this over time, one of the barriers in Manitoba is there's no real compliance and no real enforcement. We have seen it with federally regulated industries that there has been some enforcement and regulation. So if we can go across the provinces and territories and eliminate the barriers for accessibility, we can, as a whole, make Manitoba and Canada and every other province that doesn't have accessibility legislation. I think we do need to have it so that the provinces and the federal government have to work together so that you can travel from one area of Canada to another. And your expectation is that Canada is truly an accessible country for any type of disability that you might have and whatever barrier you might have. There's millions and millions of dollars that are granted to the different organizations and businesses. And it is important that government leverage that. And I think that's the easiest thing for them to do. Enforcement, the other analogy I'm going to use is workplace health and safety. Way back in the day, that was not a thing. And every provincial government and territory and even federally has workplace health and safety. Every company and organization has a workplace health and safety committee. So we need to have an accessibility committee in every organization and so that if you're coming up with a new program, you're designing a new building, you're moving, you can then look at it with an accessibility lens to it. And then how do you complain, or how do you take a complaint that some employment, the physical space, the programming is not accessible? Well, then you have to have a program or a way of dealing with that complaint in a humanist way with human rights based. Sometimes the answer might be no. I get that, but at least that I identify what the barriers are and maybe we can come up with a reasonable solution. Like I said, we're taking the long-term view. We've come a long way and we've got a long way to go. We have to educate ourselves. We have to educate all different organizations and political parties and as part of their platform. But we also have to say, this is the way we want to do business. This is the attitudinal changes that we need to come. Disability is not a bad thing. It's just a different thing. And how do we overcome that? How do we make Manitoba and Canada a better place to live? So that's kind of where I'm gonna go. And we want it to be more than just a press release on December the 3rd. That's the most important thing. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'm gonna move over to KB now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kirsten Burness. I mostly go by KB. I work in Winnipeg at the West Central Women's Resource Center, but as part of my role there, I'm able to spend a lot of time supporting our local Right to Housing Coalition here in Manitoba. So we are an informal group, so we're not a registered charity in any way. We don't receive any government funding or foundation, official funding. We receive some donations and have a really small budget for our operations. And we're mostly operate through volunteers and folks like myself who are able to spend some of our time in our paid employment to support the work of the coalition. And so we've been around for 20 years. This is actually our 20th year anniversary as a coalition. We're made up of individuals and organizations who are concerned about the lack of housing options for our lowest income community members. So we know housing is a national crisis, not just here in Canada, but in many other countries. And it affects people at all income levels. But our group is focused on trying to secure the right to housing for the lowest income communities, because they are the ones who tend to be in greatest need for housing security and access to affordable housing. What we've learned is that since the 1990s, when the federal government stopped investing in social housing, we've been relying on the private housing market to meet all housing need. And that has failed so far. We are not meeting the housing needs of our lowest income Canadians and folks who live in Canada through the private market housing options. Doesn't meet the need for affordability often. Doesn't meet the need for accessible housing, nor does it meet the need for housing with the various types of unique supports that people may need to have alongside their, physical housing unit. So instead, our coalition focuses on the need for more non-market housing. So that is housing that is owned either by the public sector, so our governments, or housing that's owned by nonprofit housing providers or co-op housing providers. So that's what we call social housing. And the key piece of that housing is also how the rents are set. So we hear a lot of different announcements by various levels of government talking about investing in affordable housing. But a lot of the affordable housing programs that are rolling out are producing housing that aren't actually affordable to people who live with very low incomes. So if we look at the Canada Mortgage and Housing definition of what is affordable housing, it's when a household is not paying more than 30% of their income on their housing. And so with social housing, it guarantees that the rent that the household pays is set to 30% of their household income. So social housing ensures that housing is affordable to the tenant. So this is what we promote. And here in Manitoba, we mostly focus on getting our provincial government and our city of Winnipeg to expand our social housing supply. We used to do a lot of focused work at the federal level, called for a national housing strategy for many years alongside other partners across Canada. And we did get a national housing strategy launched in 2017. So we were really excited about the potential for that. Over the years, the 10 years of its course, it's expected to spend over $80 billion, which is a lot of money on housing. But about 5 years into the strategy development, implementation, some analysis started to get done around how the money was being spent and what kind of housing was being built. And so in 2022, there was an analysis done by the National Housing Council, and it found that less than 5% of the units that have been built through the strategy are actually affordable to low-income households. So the rest of the housing is primarily meeting the needs of middle and even high-income earning households. Here in Manitoba, last year, we had a local researcher do an analysis of the money that came into Winnipeg and the housing that was produced here. And since the start of the strategy, we had 2,145 housing units brought into Manitoba. Only 253 of those units, so 12%, are the social housing units that are affordable to the lowest income households. So we're really, really just scratching the surface of what is needed. Here in Manitoba, we need 10,000 more social housing units to meet the need. We only built 253 over, a 5-6 year period under the National Housing Strategy. So at that time, we said we really need to start redirecting some of our attention in our advocacy work to the federal government. And so in 2023, we brought people here to Winnipeg from all provinces and territories to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. We held a conference, and agreed on the need for federal government expansion of social housing. And we developed a call to action. So this call to action is calling on the federal government to create 500,000 units of social housing across the country in 10 years. And so to, put a realistic timeline on that, it comes to 50,000 new social housing units annually for 10 years, starting right away. And for those units to be targeted at people experiencing poor housing need and homelessness, and to ensure that the rents are permanently set at no more than 30% of the household's income. The other piece of the call to action is around protecting our existing supply of social housing. So we're not going to make any gains in actually expanding the supply by building new units if we're not protecting and preserving the stock that we have, right? And if we're losing units that way. So a key piece of our call to action is for investments to maintain our existing social housing stock. So at the end of 2023, after we had pulled everyone together to come up with this call to action, we've officially launched a campaign around it and have been encouraging folks to participate in a letter writing campaign since then to let the federal government know that these investments in social housing are a priority for them. Back in November of 2024 on National Housing Day, we coordinated some actions across the country to bring attention to this issue. And here in Manitoba, we actually had our provincial government endorse it's called the Social Housing and Human Rights Campaign. They endorsed our call to action, which was great. And we'd love to see more provincial governments and local governments across the country do the same thing. Right now, with a new Minister of Housing, we're focused on a letter writing campaign that is being directed to the new minister with an urgent call to make some changes now before the election comes into play, and we may get a change in government. So yes, Parliament is prorogued, but government still operates during this time. And there has been money through the National Housing Strategy that has been set aside to roll out in this fiscal year that has already been approved through Parliament. And so our letter writing campaign to the minister is encouraging government to redirect the funding that is available to be allocated right now toward away from market housing and towards social housing. When election time does roll around and the parties start talking about their platforms and we get the opportunity to start talking to candidates, this call to action around expanding social housing is what our coalition is going to be watching for and encouraging all political parties to make commitments around the expansion of social housing. So I'll leave it there because I think I'm at 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, KB. Next, I'll turn it over to Elections Canada.
My name is Cynthia Henley. I am a Senior Outreach Officer at Elections Canada, and I'm here to wrap up this panel discussion. So thank you to everyone who is here today to engage in meaningful conversations about the important issues to consider before heading to vote. As we conclude, I'd like to share some practical information about the tools and services Elections Canada provides to ensure that the voting process is accessible to everyone. Before we dive in, I want to emphasize that Elections Canada is a completely nonpartisan agency and that the information shared today only applies to federal elections because provincial and municipal elections are managed by separate entities. So to begin, I want to mention the different ways to vote. If you are already registered to vote, you will be mailed a personalized voter information card about 3 weeks before Election Day. Information about the location and time you can vote will be included on that card. There are 4 main ways you can cast your vote: by mail at any Elections Canada office across the country, on advanced polling days at your assigned polling place, or the most common way is on Election Day at your assigned polling place. If you have sensory sensitivities or feel overwhelmed by crowds, advanced voting polling days, or voting by mail might be good options for you, as they can help reduce exposure to large groups and also allow you to vote in a more comfortable environment. There are also options for voting in hospitals, long-term care facilities, and senior residences. A polling station may be set up on site, or an election worker may visit electors at their bedside to assist them with registration and voting. For voters who are unable to read or unable to vote using the special ballot process because of a disability, may, upon request, vote at home. To qualify for this service, you must meet certain criteria and contact Elections Canada. And to find out if someone is eligible to vote from home and to make those arrangements, please contact Elections Canada as well, either by phone or on the website. If you decide to vote in person, there are a variety of accessibility measures that should be in place or that you can request. When they are selected, polling places must meet the mandatory criteria of the polling place suitability checklist to be considered accessible. The checklist contains 37 criteria, with 15 of them being mandatory to make a polling place more accessible. So there are different criteria such as level access to the entrance, the weight of the entrance door to make sure that it isn't too heavy. And another example is having the voting room on the same level as the entrance. Most polling places go above these standards and meet as many of the criteria as possible. To check the accessibility of your assigned polling place, you can search online, call Elections Canada, or check your voter information card once you receive it in the mail. Alternatively, you can call Elections Canada for this information. If your local polling place is not accessible to you, you may apply for a transfer certificate that allows you to vote at a polling place that meets your needs. You can also consider voting a different way, like by mail, or another way, one of the other methods I mentioned earlier, such as a local Elections Canada office. There is a range of tools available to make voting more accessible. We offer large print lists of candidates, braille list of candidates, which is only available on election day. On election day, your polling station will have tactile and braille voting templates that you can use to mark your ballot. You simply fit your ballot into the template and use the braille and embossed numbers to find the space next to your chosen candidate's name. You may want to use the voting templates in combination with the large print or braille list of candidates. Our magnifiers make your ballot look bigger. They are also lightweight and have a light. You can simply ask for one from an election worker at your polling station. There are large group pencils. These extra large pencils help mark your ballot. And finally, the signature guides for someone needing assistance signing their name. In some cases, you might need to sign a form during the voting or the registering process. To make voting more accessible, we make sure that all polling stations have either an automatic door opener or an election worker at the door to offer assistance. Sign language interpretation. So this service also needs to be requested ahead of time. We always recommend electors to call ahead of time as soon as the election is called, if possible, so that so we can make this arrangement for them. And in addition, voters can receive assistance with marking their ballots. You can bring someone you know to help or ask an election worker for support. You may also use an assistive device when voting, such as your own pencil to mark the ballot or a personal mobile device. All reasonable steps should be taken to preserve the secrecy of the vote. Also, voters who use mobile devices should bring earphones to respect the secrecy of the vote, and any recording made should be deleted. We obviously also support the use of service animals to assist voters with disabilities when they go to vote. So we offer different information and accessible formats, mainly voter information that refers to key information about when, where, and the ways to register and vote. These resources are available online in print and in the following alternative formats. So we have large print, braille, audio files consisting of DAISY CDs and digital MP3, videos with full transcription and captioning. We have ASL and LSU videos and multiple Indigenous and ethnocultural languages as well. We have different information such as toolkits with a step-by-step guide on running as a candidate and about working in a federal election. Some of these resources are also available in accessible formats. Lastly, we have partnerships with different community organizations like MLPD, helping us share and distribute these information products to electors facing barriers to voting. On a related note, Elections Canada is always hiring individuals from diverse backgrounds, including those with disabilities, to work at the polls. This helps enhance awareness of barriers and how to address them. During federal elections, over 2,000 community relations officers are hired to engage with specific groups such as Indigenous peoples, youth, New Canadians, and individuals with disabilities. Their role involves providing information and support to their target group on how, when, and where to register and vote. And the Accessibility Community Relations Officers work to enhance accessibility and eliminate barriers to voting. For more information about job opportunities and our hiring process, you can contact us or refer to the resources sheet that we will be sharing after this presentation. And you can also refer to some of the links that are shared in the chat. And this is my last slide, so I'm almost done, everyone. So lastly, I just want to make sure you know that we have a feedback mechanism in place to collect comments and complaints from electors. So the voter feedback form can be completed online at the polling station when you go vote, by phone, by video relay service. We really want to know how your voting experience went, because this is how we can make sure to improve.
We too would encourage people to fill out that form with hearing experiences. Now is time for folks to ask questions. If you'd like to raise your hand if you have a question, or you can put it in the chat.
My question is around housing and an initiative a good friend of mine came up with. It's obviously not a perfect plan. I know, David, you've already heard the spiel before, but thought the other advocates around housing might be interested in this idea. So it involves amending the registered disability savings plan to allow those beneficiaries to use that money that they invest, or at least contributed to that account, to a down payment for a home. Very similar to what people are already able to do with their registered retirement savings plan. And I won't go too much into the details about what an RDSP is and how to contribute, but if that is somewhere on your radar, I've tried to reach out to some organizations about that, but I wasn't able to. Well, I got ignored is what happened. But I'm just wondering if that is something you've heard of before. And it's not perfect because, of course, not every person with a disability has a registered disability savings plan. But for those that do, that might help at least with the down payment process of owning their own home. Thank you.
No, I haven't heard of that. It's an interesting idea. The coalition, the Manitoba coalition that I talked about, Right to Housing, and our National Housing Coalition aren't looking at home ownership. We're focused on renter households. So because the vast majority of the low income folks that we have in mind when we're talking about securing the right to housing, home ownership is not close to an option for them. Obviously, for some folks living with low incomes, they may be in more of a position to do that, and perhaps the suggestion that you've brought forward, maybe others are looking at, is something that would allow folks to take that next step that they're not otherwise allowed to take. But as I said, home ownership is not an area of focus for our coalition.
people here in Manitoba, like families, caregivers of the children with disabilities, especially in school, are also advocating for and really resonate with what David Cron said about that there are accessibility laws, there are human rights laws, but it's really the enforcement and the compliance that's the problem. We do believe that I know that there's a lot of sectors of the AMA, and that I think that one thing that they've kind of need to concentrate on too is education, accessibility standards in education. We have a lot of kids with disabilities who are not being able to really get their full support in school, and it's just snowballs that they don't continue schooling, they don't get the proper education, they don't get the job, and then hence the poverty statistics that Ms. Rabia is saying. So if it starts there, I think that it's going to help a lot of the disabled community, education sector wise. Yeah.
You, Patricia. David, did you want to go next?
Sure. And my question is, out of that 251 new accessible, affordable suites, how many were accessible? Did you have that type of information? Chris? Yeah, sorry. Out of the 251 accessible suites that were built in the last 6 years, were any of them considered accessible?
I don't know that that information was available, so I can check with the local researcher to find out, but no, it wasn't included in the analysis, at least what was presented in the report. But we could dig around.
Okay, thanks. And your thing about education is important, and it's eliminating barriers throughout all the pieces of community, right? The healthcare system is another piece that needs to have specific accessibility laws. And we certainly learned that during COVID, how the first thing that went out the window was accessibility and a human rights piece. So, you know, we know it's all about enforcement, education, and compliance.
The question in the chat is, this person lives in an apartment complex where nearly all 40 suites have disabled voters. Is it possible to create a polling station in our meeting room on elections day so everyone can vote accessibly?
I can answer to that. So most definitely, I would suggest that the person reaches its local returning officer. It's the Elections Canada official working at the riding level that will be the one selecting the polling stations or the polling places. Usually they do target these places because they know it will they will be able to target a big chunk of electors in one spot. Especially if it's I would assume that the building is already accessible, so that would kind of check all the boxes. But definitely reach out to Elections Canada to be in touch with your local returning officer to ask them for that. It's still, there's still plenty of time because they started reviewing where they want to rent the local places, but the leases are not official until the election is called, so it's still time to consider these things at the moment.
A few years back, I became aware through an involvement with MLPD about the CRO situation, and I ended up in the last 2 federal elections being a CRO for accessibility based out of Winnipeg South. So seeing what was going on, I thought, okay, I should, check in with the returning officer. And what she said to me is that because of a boundary realignment, which took Saint Amant out of that area, like that electoral district, that they would no longer have funding for that position because there was no agency organization within that boundary that represented disabilities. This takes it back to the reporting I did after each of the 2 elections, where they asked, what we encountered and what our recommendations were and all of that. I think the CRO for accessibility should be looked at in a broader sense. If you do it by electoral districts, for instance, if CNIB sits out on Portage Avenue, if the Deaf Center is sitting on Pembina, and many others are spread all over, that has little to do with where the actual membership resides, because they reside all over. They just happen to be served out of that particular location. So, when I was involved, I was all over the city. I certainly wasn't just in Winnipeg South. I went to CNIB, I went to the Deaf Center, I went to many places. I went over to St. Boniface for the Francophone issues. And I think that needs to be looked at differently, because, where the organization has a head office has little to do with how people are spread out. And if you're talking about, say, Manitoba Brain Injury Association, which I served on the board of, and also MLPD that I served on the provincial council of, that's a Manitoba base. So your membership is all over, and not just in the area where the address shows you have an office. So that's something I think Elections Canada needs to think about. And to have us out there, I think it'd be more important to have CROs look at the bigger picture within an area, like in Winnipeg. And if there's more than one of us, what should happen maybe is that we get assigned an organization or a number of organizations, rather than, say, okay, this is in that catchment area, and so that's where you should deal. I mean, it does not make sense to me, having dealt in a provincial setting. So maybe that's something that I did put it in those reports, but it didn't. I never heard back anything on that, and I really think Elections Canada needs to look at how CROs can be the most effective, and having funding only tied to an area because an address shows up in that catchment doesn't make a lot of sense.
Thank you, Fred. We're actually a little bit over time, but Fred, I'll follow up with the point you made, and find out what happens now, and see if I can get any information for you on that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I do want to note that we're about 6 minutes over time. So thank you everyone for their patience. Thank you for being here. I will note that if you've been paying attention to the news at all, an election is very likely just around the corner. This is not the last Elections Canada event that we will be having. There will be another one in the spring. We also have a fair bit of Elections Canada information that we've been doing over the years on our website, and we will be adding more as we get closer to the election. So please look for that. If you're watching this on a recording, any Zoom links that have come up in this meeting will be made available, as will the link to our Elections Canada information on our website as well. Thank you, everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks for having us.